Yeah.
Hi, I'm Steve. I'm the General Manager at Elliot Leigh Guaranteed Rents. Today we're doing our first property podcast about the Renters Reform Bill, about the challenges landlords are facing, about the upcoming legislation changes that are coming in. I've got Paul Shamplina with me today from Landlord Action, basically, and we're going to run through some of these changes and try and explain things that are happening and to give you a bit of information basically about what's going on. So, hi Paul, welcome.
How are you? Yes, pleasure to be here, Steve.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. Good to see you again after last week.
Yes, last week we put a charity boxing event on, raised over £15,000 for a local food bank. It's, as you know, it's really tough at the moment, Steve, in a cost of living crisis for tenants, as well as obviously now it's got tougher for landlords with the interest rates that have gone up.
Yeah. So obviously today's talking about landlords, about trying to give some advice to landlords and things like that. So first of all, you're in the game. You see it, speak to landlords every day. What are the challenges that are facing landlords at the moment? What's the biggest challenges that we've got?
Yeah, I mean, look, Steve, I've been in this industry. I first started acting for landlords 32 years ago. I started Landlord Action 23 years ago. As you know, I'm on the board of Hamilton Fraser, and we own 8-9 different brands. You know what? This is the most challenging time that I've known for landlords, more so in the rental stock crisis, because there are landlords exiting the marketplace.
Yeah.
Landlords need to keep calm. But I mean, if you think about what's happened over the last few years, you've had the abolishment of interest mortgage relief, which has really taken its toll. I mean, what industry would you tax on turnover rather than profit? Well, that's what happens in the private rental sector for landlords. As well as that, of course, you had the Deregulation Act. That's just legislation that came in. And then, of course, you had the really accelerated pace of mortgage interest rates, which happened when Liz Truss came in on a fated reign as a landlord for, I think, all but of a month, I think it was. And now we sit here talking now on your first property podcast where the interest rate is 5%. Don't forget, landlords had it 0% for the best part of 12 years. And then, of course, we've talked about EPCs. They've been kicked into the long grass. And then, of course, got the Renters Reform Bill. There's a whole lot of challenges for landlords. So, you know, but landlords, Steve, are adaptable, flexible, and very, very resilient. You know, this is a long-term game. But actually, as a landlord, it's very positive. There's more tenants than ever before. Void periods are at their record least time. And actually, the pool of tenants out there is greater than ever. And obviously, there's less properties. So it's challenging, but still really worthwhile being a landlord.
Well, this is some of the challenges that a lot of social housing providers are finding at the moment. So, as you know, Paul, we're a guaranteed rent specialist. We've been doing it for 20 years. We work with dozens and dozens of local authorities and charities and housing associations. And basically, we've always provided that stopgap between council house and the tenants, basically. So we've been providing the councils with that assistance, and we've done a pretty good job of it over the last 20 years. And the trouble is that what we're finding is that the lower end properties are now going to the higher paying tenants, basically, and we're getting a squeeze on the social housing. And what that's culminating is obviously more and more tenants approaching the councils, needing more assistance, needing more help from local authorities because they just can't find the properties on their own. So we've been working really hard to try and procure more and more properties for these councils. But the problem is, it's not even the rates. The rates that we're paying are quite good. But the problem is, it's just the lack of stock out there at the moment. And we do private rentals. We're seeing when we put a private rental on the market, there's 20 people queuing up for it. Problem is, a lot of them people don't pass the references. And when they don't pass the references, that means they're not applicable for the property. And they're saying this to us. We've put our name down for 15 properties this week, and we've not even had a viewing because they're not meeting the reference requirements for rent. So these people are now going back to the councils as well and needing assistance. And yes, as you said, the changes to interest rates, that's been a big impact on landlords, massive impact. I don't think anyone saw it coming as much as it has done, but now the interest rates have gone up, the margins are squeezed. But as you said, it is still good opportunity out there for landlords, I believe. I don't think this is the end for landlords, certainly. It's harder. You're seeing landlords that are maybe coming to the end, coming out of the market a little bit now. Maybe they're getting on, they want to sell the property. but it's still a good landlord, and property is always a good long-term investment, I feel. And I wanted to, again, if you was a landlord now, what would you be doing, Paul? You are a landlord. What are you doing?
For me, as a landlord, there's a lot to be positive about. It's about how do you deal with the changes? Have you had a business case? Have you reviewed your assets? Okay, because you know what? We are in a stock crisis, and if you've got a property and you're renting it out, if it's a decent standard, depending if you're not a highly leveraged and you're not stuck on a real high interest rate, which is a worry, well, then it's good to be in.
Yeah, and everyone asks one of the questions about interest rates. What's going to happen with the interest rates? You probably get that question all the time. I get that question all the time. It's going to stabilise. It's going to get better. It's got to. Once they get the inflation down, the theory is it's going to start stabilising. So yes, it's tough at the moment. It will get better, I think. And it's about, you said, about staying calm. And also, I think you said it, Paul. Landlords are resilient. We've had a lot of. This is the biggest change in 30 years. But over the last 10, 15 years, we've had loads of changes coming in anyway, haven't we, as landlords? And we've managed to work with them and work around them and come up with different strategies of how we're going to operate. And this is one of the things. Yes, this is a big change, but as you said, it's about staying calm, looking at the future, looking long term, looking at things like us with the guaranteed rents, where we've got longer term contracts that are fixed in place. We're renting back to social housing tenants. These are positives that I feel that we're doing in the market, and can also benefit a landlord basically as well.
As a landlord now, if I'm looking at getting in, I know that the market's coming down. I think there's some good bargains that can come up. I think there's some better bargains to be had further down the line. I think obviously we haven't seen, landlords are taking 85% below market value. A year ago, they were taking 95%. Buying a property with a tenant in situ can be really good for a potential investor. Obviously, you should be looking at incorporating because it's easier.
Say that as well, Paul,
yeah, incorporation. But the thing is, there's a lot more stress testing. I mean, cash is king, obviously. But if we look at where we are, we're based in London, the southeast. Obviously, the house prices are astronomical. First-time buyers have been squeezed out of the market. So it's challenges for landlords, but I can tell you now, and we know David Coughlin from the Landlord Sales Agency, he's buying and selling landlords' properties all the time. He says 75% of the properties he's selling are to other landlords. So that's encouraging. Yeah. There's a lot of big entities that are looking to get in. A lot of funds are looking to get in. But, we look at, the event last week, where you came down to my boxing event. You look at that hotel, the Holiday Inn in Finchley. That's been closed for the best part of 3.5 years since COVID, and it's helping and homing the homeless and temporary accommodation on a nightly basis for Barnet Council. Can you imagine how much money they are paying these hotels? It's horrendous.
I mean, this is the thing that we're seeing. We're speaking to our tenants that are coming into our properties now from councils, and they're telling us, "I spent 3 months in a hotel. I'm so glad I've got a good quality property now."
They appreciate it more.
Yeah, they do. They do appreciate it more. And also, like we said, with the changes, with the interest rates that are rising, there's a lot more risk for a landlord now in terms of rent arrears. So if you've got a tenant that falls into rent arrears, then with your higher mortgage repayments, it's even harder for you to sustain that. And one of the things that we've always done at Elliot Leigh is we've always guaranteed the rent. That's our number one priority.
So how does that? So Steve, on that point, because I think a lot of landlords don't, how does that work compared to a normal rental that you would do to a universal tenant credit?
Right. So Paul, what we do is we will take a landlord's property and we will rent that property on a fixed term, on a longer term contract, typically of say 3 to 5 years. Now, the biggest point for a landlord is that they know that they're getting their rent the same day every single month, guaranteed. If the property's empty, if the tenants aren't paying, even if the property's empty for 4 or 5 months, the landlord still gets their rent. We cover the refurbishments. We take the risk out of that for landlords. So the cost of refurbishments, the shot up, the cost of materials, cost of labour shot up. We're still covering the cost of that. We're covering the cost of minor repairs. We're dealing with the damages at properties, when tenants, vacating, making sure they're fixed and things like that. So these are all the things that we're doing to take that risk away. But again, we're seeing more and more landlords approach us. We probably took about 50 or 60 calls last week from landlords asking about the guaranteed rent scheme, because they're worried about what's coming up. They're worried about the changes. They've had tenants that they've had to evict. They've had tenants that they've had to evict for rent arrears and things like this. The EPC changes, another thing that's coming on. That's just been kicked back, isn't it, to 2028? Am I right in saying that? It's another worry for landlords, or?
Yeah, I mean, obviously getting it to levels. I always knew they were going to push it back. I mean, look, if you've got stuff that you need to do to your property, I mean, well, then depending on the cost of it, then why wouldn't you add value to that property? Why wouldn't you want to try and keep utility bills down? I mean, obviously for HMO landlords, they're going through a tough time because there's a consultation about that tenants are going to be liable for utilities, which would be a killer in HMO. Can you imagine that? So I think, look, the first bit of major legislation that came in through renting, yes, the Housing Act came in 88, but obviously was the deposit legislation that came in 2007. Okay, we're 16 years down the line, which is a long time, a long time, and a lot. Don't forget we're going to have an election, the best part of maybe latter part of 2024, early 25. The reality is Labour will get in. Okay, rent caps supposedly are off the table, which is a landlord's fear as well.
Well, I know that Labour have sort of said that, haven't they? They don't want
to. They said that the last 48 hours, but I think that something most probably will be done with regard to affordability for tenants.
Yeah,
I don't know what that is. There might be something halfway. They talk about rent freezes and so forth, but I think with the EPC, look, we're based in London, and the southeast, but I mean, I said this in a previous podcast. If you've got a two-bed terrace, an old, Victorian terrace, and it's hard to do the walls, and there's a whole lot of stuff that you need to do. It's going to cost you 10-15 grand, and you're earning $6,000 a year from a UC tenant. What's the point?
A lot of the questions that I'm getting asked by current landlords and new landlords is about the Renters Reform Bill. We've probably seen it in the news. We've seen it, what the 12 points are. But again, it's still not very clear for a lot of people. So can you just give some explanation about what the Renters Reform Bill is about, when we expect it to come in, and the 12 points, the real 12 main points that they're talking about?
Yes, of course, Steve. So the Renters Reform Bill is most probably one of the biggest changes that's happened in the last 30 years. It was brought in because under non-decent home standard, you'll know about that, obviously, through renting. I still believe that the housing in the private rental sector is far better than it is in the social housing sector, right? We looked at the stats, but the government has said, right, we're bringing the Renters Reform Bill because tenants are paying the best part of between 30 and 40% of their rent in the private market of their wages towards rent, which is a lot of money. So they deserve something better. They deserve a better service. Landlords are going to be more professional. So what they're saying is that under the decent home standard, 21% of properties in the private rental sector are of not of a decent home standard. So really, without going through all the 12 points, but I'll give you two things that are a worry, and then I'll come back to that, which is the abolishment of Section 21. What does that mean? What's the effect that has on landlords?
Yeah.
And what's the strengthening of the grounds on Section 8 and periodic tenancies? Now, they're my main concerns. Everything else is for the good of the business and for the good of the standard of the property and the product that we offer. So, i.e., we have a property portal so that the property, which has a unique URN number, has all its compliance stuff registered, a bit like an MOT with a car. I buy a car, is anything outstanding? So gas safety, HMO licensing, is the deposit scheme, is the MEES, is the electrical, all that stuff. So a landlord, a tenant, a letting agent has access to that. If you're buying a property at auction, wouldn't it be good to know that? So that's good, but that's a massive IT build. I don't know how that's going to be done. All right. There is an argument to say, if you have that, well, why do you need licensing? Obviously, a big question. Big question, but obviously councils earn a lot of money out of licensing naturally. But without all of this, there's no point bringing stuff in if you don't have enforcement. You need enforcement, stronger enforcement. Yeah. Again, they said that they're going to earmark and ring fence £20 million enforcement for this. That won't touch the side, Steve.
No,
not in England and Wales. Like, this is for England. Wales has got its separate legislation. Scotland's got its separate legislation. Then there's other things about landlord redress. So there's 2.3 million landlords. Every single landlord, whether it's managed or not managed, will have to be part of a redress scheme. So we run a redress scheme.
Are they asking, even if they're even if they rent their property for an agency, they've still got to be part of a redress?
They have to be part of a redress scheme, correct? Right.
Okay.
But then there's an argument to say, was that landlord registration, Steve? Well, the argument is it most probably is.
Yeah.
So that means that if I'm a tenant, I'm renting from you, I pay my month's rent, month's deposit, but you don't carry out repairs. I've got some sort of redress that I can complain to. At the moment, tenants don't have redress. They've got end of tenancy redress relating to deposits. And as you know, we run my deposits. But obviously, so redress is going to be a good thing, and quite rightly. As to whether tenants will maybe some tenants may try and abuse it and might long it out so they don't pay rent. You know, I'm just being cynical because I've been doing this for a long time. But landlord redress is a good thing, right? Then you can't advertise, say you can't have a DSS tenant or children. Well, that's discrimination. You can ask to have a pet in a property, and actually the landlord can say, well, you've got to take pet insurance out. You can't discriminate against that.
It's got to be reasonable, a pet. You can't have a...
It's got to be reasonable. We can't talk about getting a massive Alsatian in a little studio in Dagenham. That doesn't make sense, right? Or you've got a head lease. Then there's other scenarios about mediation coming in, that if the tenant falls in arrears, what type of mediation process have you carried out before it going to court? And then, of course, the bigger, and then about deposit, passporting, a deposit following the tenant. That's been kicked into the long grass. But more important,
I think that's a good thing. A tenant can take their deposit with them as they move on, so they haven't got
well, that's right. So I have talked about that, but there's been no detail. So the main thing that we've got outstanding is the abolishment of Section 21. So obviously, I've been interviewed, I've been on TV, non-stop for the last. Don't forget, the bill was the white paper was earmarked about 3 years ago. We were talking about having housing courts as well. That's been kicked off the table. That needs to come back. Section 21 being abolished, they call it non-fault. The three most common grounds for serving Section 21 at this moment in time, Steve, is the landlord is selling the property, there's rent arrears, or there's antisocial behaviour, which is a real big problem. When Section 21 goes, how do you use Section 8 on antisocial behaviour? Well, there needs to be a streamline, there needs to be priority courts, what type of evidence. You'll know what it's like if you've got a real bad tenant causing antisocial behaviour for the neighbours and other tenants in the property. It can be absolute hell, and a lot of them are intimidated to give evidence because, of course, of that individual. We have a lot of spike in mental health, which is
and it's such a long process as well, isn't it, Paul? At the moment, to issue the Section 8 and to get the court date and to go through that, it's such a long process. And when you've got neighbours, like you said, that are in distress and it's causing issues, it needs to be streamlined. It needs to be quicker, doesn't it?
Well, that's why landlords use Section 21. It's going to be abolished. So how's that going to work? Look, serving a notice, asking for your property back is a last resort. Only 6% of the time do landlords serve notices generally. But worryingly enough, Steve, I mean, we are the business we've ever been at Landlord Action. We've seen a 91% increase year on year of landlords issuing Section 21 accelerated procedures. 91% increase. We have 60% of our instructions are Section 21, 40 Section 8. It never, ever, ever was that. It was normally the other way around and more. So you will see that, and that's a bit of a worry. It's really good to have communication. But as I said,
are you seeing a lot of them cases due to rent arrears as well at the moment with tenants?
Yes, rent arrears. But the thing is, there is unintended consequence, Steve, because when you are going to have a landlord that's serving a notice, as I said, the second most popular reason why a landlord serves a Section 21 is because there's rent arrears. They can't be bothered to go to court, stand up before a judge on a Section 8 case. So those rent arrears aren't registered anywhere. Bearing in mind, if you get a money order on a Section 8, that's not a county court judgment.
No,
your tenant can leave your property and go re-let. What happens is that when you get rid of all those Section 21 cases, let's say there's normally 25,000 of those a year. I do predict that we're going to be looking at, by the end of 2023, pre-pandemic levels of about 120,000 possession claims, which is social Section 8 accelerated, right? And it's going to increase. Bearing in mind, mortgage repossession is going to go up. Courts are under pressure. Judges are under pressure. Bailiffs are under pressure. Okay. Those tenants that were able to try and get a foot of temporary accommodation and to be rehoused, a lot of them have done that through a Section 21 notice, correct?
Yep.
Section 21 will have no indication of rent arrears. You get rid of Section 21, all of a sudden the landlords have to go under Section 8, Ground 8, rent arrears, possession order, money order against the tenant. The tenant goes to the council. The council turn around and say, hold on, you've got £6,000 rent arrears.
Yeah.
You can't rehouse you. You've made yourself a temporary accommodation.
You're intentionally homeless.
You're intentionally homeless. You know better than it. So the tenant groups haven't really thought. There's stuff that they haven't really thought about. And I worry about this. And when you're on the ground like I am, and you're around and whatever. So I am working with an organisation called the Lettings Industry Council. We're doing a response to the Renters Reform Bill and what you need to do and how you need to do it. But there is a lot of dialogue going on in the background. But don't forget, it's quite political. Housing is a very, very hot topic.
I'll tell you one of the things I was surprised at that the Renters Reform has sort of come in is the periodic tenancies for tenants now. Yeah. No fixed term tenancies anymore. So what that basically means is you can have a tenant move into your property and 3-4 months later, they can give you notice and they can move out again. I'm surprised that they didn't introduce at least minimum fixed terms for tenants. I know that there's no end for a tenant now, effectively, but I'm surprised by that because I think that, again, is a little bit of a worry for a landlord that they're in a periodic tenancy. The tenant could give them notice at any point. It could be a tenant that's looking at doing a house refurb. They're not going to tell them that, and they're obviously suddenly they're moving out.
I think that it's a worry for letting agents because you have renewal departments and renewal fees is an issue for letting agents. I think you've got the if you look at the private student sector, Michael Gove did make a comment that we are going to look at that because obviously the purpose-built blocks for students are exempt from obviously fixed-term tenancies. I think I think that has to be changed because, like you said, you could do a property up. It's just what it is. It's the relet fees, which is an issue. Yeah. But bearing in mind, you're always going to find a tenant.
You will always find a tenant, but you've got a void period. Then you've got, like you said,
well, yeah, you've got to. There is going to be costs. So they've done it with regard to security, which has happened like in Scotland. I think there is another issue, and I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate. I think also, if you come back to the point where I think also tenants might be a little bit fearful dealing with it. The problem you've got is that tenants now, they need to, landlords need to know about tenants that go on social media. The problem is the tenant is driven by the property and the price, not by the landlord. Yeah. So the problem is you might have a landlord who's a landlord, rents it out, and then he decides actually 2 years down the line he's going to sell, but the tenant wants the property to be their home, because the name of the game is no news is good news for a landlord.
We get that. It's hard for a tenant sometimes. They've moved into a property. Their kids are going to the schools now. Right. They're in local doctors and things like that. And sometimes you do hear it. The tenants had to move on 2 or 3 times over the space of 6 years.
And that is stressful, Steve.
And that is stressful. It's a cost for the tenant. I get that, as you said, but I think it's probably gone a little bit too far in what it's gone to. But with things like I said, the periodic tenancies and things like that, I just find that quite an odd thing that they've not.
Yeah, I think there's a red herring, Steve, because the average term of a tenancy is 4 years and 4 months.
Yeah.
When people are staying in more than 6 and 12 months, and now they're staying longer. Because actually, if they try and move out after 5 years, they go and try and find the equivalent property. It's another £500 a month more. You understand? So it's getting the right balance, and I just think that it's you can't rush through the legislation. It's going to take time. I mean, the roadmap for that to happen, you need a second reading, needs Royal Assent. There's amendments. You go, then it's got to go House of Lords. I mean, when you change legislation, it's quite complicated. But I am genuinely
18 months roughly it will take to go.
Maybe about 18 months. About 18 months. I am genuinely really concerned because I've never known a rental stock crisis. I mean, I was this week, I was on a stage to 1,500 letting agents, the Arla property market, Wembley, and you pose the question to these agents: how many of you've lost landlords because of the Section 21? Loads of hands went up. So stock is being lost, and I've been calling this for 2 years.
It's right now. It's not even in 18. I don't know whether
it's not now.
This is not a problem or not, but it's happening now. We're seeing landlords withdrawing.
Yeah, but Steve, I've been calling this for 2 years. I've been seeing it happening. I just really have.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it during COVID. It was tenants, councils that we work with. It was a lot of stock out there during COVID. Everyone moved out of London, things like that. It's totally spun 360 now.
It's gone 360.
Yeah. But like you said, we're still managing to take new properties on. We're still managing to take HMOs on now, which we're dealing with more with local authorities. We're still providing good quality properties. We're working with more charities, more associations, more councils than ever. And they're, and we are doing well with them councils still. We've still got a very good name out there. But as you said, it is for the landlords with 1 or 2 properties, it's very difficult at the moment. But I think, like you said, if you've got longevity, if you're new to the market, if you want this as a long-term thing, everyone always says that no bricks and mortar. It never, it's always there. And I believe that if it's a long-term investment for yourself, I think it still works for a landlord, or as we like to call ourselves now, housing providers, don't we, Paul? Rather than landlord.
I think housing provider. I think the word landlord is archaic now. Landlord. I think the tenant is your customer, whether it's a social housing tenant or it's a private tenant, or corporate tenant. I think you said the word buy-to-let is long term. Yeah. And it is from bricks and mortar, and so I think, look, if you're a newbie getting into this, you need to listen to podcasts like this. You need to go to the Landlord Investment Show. You need to belong to the NRLA. You need to hear experts. There's a whole lot of stuff that you can do, and it's really free and accessible.
And also speak to people. If you've got an agency, if you've got a letting agency that you're working with, anything like that, speak to them. We do a lot of research into this. We speak a lot. We've read the white paper on the Renters Reform Bill. We know about the EPC changes. So if you are worried, or you have got questions, speak to someone that knows about it, I think, as well, because sometimes you can panic. You can read the negative a lot of the time. Interest rates going up, house prices coming down, blah, 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 blah. But actually speaking to someone that knows about what they're talking about, or have got a bit more knowledge about what
yes, of course,
is important as well, I think. So, Paul, finally then, what advice would you give to landlords right now?
Great question, Steve. So I would say don't panic. Keep calm. Look at your asset. Business case, what that asset looks like. What are the rates? Okay. If you've come out of fixed term and it's jumped, I understand that. Are you self-managing? Are you using an agent for managing? Are you obviously, down the social housing provider route? Just assess it. Also put a price on your time as a landlord. Everyone's at a different age. Do you have a full-time job? Do you want to be taking calls from a tenant? They're drunk at 5 a.m. They've lost their kid. There's a whole load of stuff. Make sure you surround yourself with experienced people, I would say. But just don't panic and whack in a Section 21 because you think you can't use a Section 21. What's the name of the game is? If I've got a good tenant, Steve, I want the tenant to stay with me as long as possible, don't I?
Exactly that.
I want my rent to be paid. I want my asset to be paid. And, I want to be able to keep my buy-to-let stock and, please God, touch wood, be able to pass it on to my children further down the line. It's long-term.
Definitely. All right, then, Paul. Well, thank you for your time today. It's been good chatting to you. And, I hope to see you, probably see you next week, but we'll speak again soon. All right.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Paul. Thank you, mate.